Right, so next up, we have David Goh, head of Hyundai Cradle Singapore, to come talk us through the plans Jeffrey mentioned earlier, that EV Microfactory in Singapore, the Jurong Innovation Center. David, please join us on stage. Welcome, David. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Now, David, without letting too much of the cat out of the bag, what are you most excited about when it comes to Hyundai's next-gen vehicles? How will the world of infotainment, commerce, and even health tech within vehicles evolve?
Wow,
I know it's a big question.
Yeah,
we can break it down.
A lot of questions in that. I would say that. As what Wei Hun started, right, when she did that introduction, and she referred to ADAS and all these jargon around autonomous driving and all that. I think what is really exciting that is happening, and this is going to be a multi-year effort, is that we're moving towards what we call software-defined vehicles. If I may give an analogy with the mobile phone, right now we are probably sort of somewhere exiting the old Nokia, Motorola mobile phone of the 90s, and you're starting to see a lot of sort of feature phones. So you see a lot of feature-rich cars that are coming online, right? A lot of feature-rich cars, but we're not quite at the stage of a smartphone or a smartphone on wheels. When we talk about smartphone, basically you're talking about a much higher computing power, and I would say the differentiation is that you've got access to an unbounded world of applications. So somebody who is 16 years old somewhere can write an app, and I can download it and have it run on my phone. So imagine when that happens, when you have a 16-year-old, 14-year-old sitting somewhere, write an app, and you are brave enough to download it into your car and have that app run your car. Yeah, that basically changes the entire equation. But for that to happen, what Hyundai is doing is that we have started to build this very, very seriously. We are hiring a global team. Currently, it's about 600 people. It's going to go up to about 650, 700 people globally. It's a global software center. We're doing it very thoughtfully. We are, again, as an analogy, with the current house, the foundations don't fit the new stuff that we want to do. You can't add more stories on it. You can't expand the house. So what we're doing is that we're ripping out the foundations. We are rebuilding the house, starting from the foundations. So what we're doing is that we're looking at re-architecting electrical and electronic on a controller unit basis. So there's going to be a lot more integration, as one word. I'm sure my friend KF from Continental will tell you a lot more about the difficulties of integrating ECUs, which are supposed to be simple for safety reasons, and how we abstract that. And not just Hyundai, the other large auto OEMs are also building their own operating system. So we are launching our own operating system. It's called CCOS. That is going to be able to interact with multiple layers of the car. But again, these are some of the technical bits. So that I would say is one large area. And related to that, right? I think there was a gentleman earlier. I think Arthur mentioned that perhaps you're going to have a lot more people switch to car sharing rather than car ownership. For an OEM, we're fine as long as somebody buys the car. We're okay, right? It doesn't matter who, right? There's somebody. But I think with software-defined vehicles, when your car starts to resemble your living room, right? I think car lovers everywhere would still want to own their own living room and car, rather than say, well, let's jump straight into sort of co-living. I mean, there are going to be people who like that, but yeah, I mean, I'm a car lover, so I'm sure there are still going to be people who are going to want to own cars.
That is true, because it's all about putting that personal touch, right, on their own cars as they like it. Speaking of putting that personal touch and electric vehicles, I understand that Hyundai Motor Group has invested about Singapore $400 million to build a 7-story innovation center and microfactory to produce EVs in Singapore, bringing manufacturing of cars back to Singapore after 40 years. Now, it's quite rare. I think Hyundai is one of the very few OEMs in the world to have a microfactory. Tell us more about this microfactory and the customizable build-to-order capabilities that you can now offer.
I would say that technically it's probably more assembling and less sort of like traditional manufacturing. And the brave new world that we're in today is that the electric vehicle resembles probably more of a electronic device as opposed to traditional combustion engine type of vehicles. Right. So what's interesting for Singapore, we call our microfactory HMGIX, at least at this moment, is that it has given us basically, I would say, a fresh, sheet of paper to redesign a manufacturing process. So we don't have to follow, to the T, right? What we do in Korea and in other parts of the world. It gives us that latitude to experiment, and therefore it empowers us to look for new ways of doing things. So as an example, I think, what is a very tangible outcome of that is that we are injecting in a lot more automation into each of the process cells at HMGIX than is being contemplated elsewhere in the world. And the purpose of doing this is that, and we're doing this, every single thing that we do, we digital twin it so that we can do experiments virtually. We measure all the time, and what we want to do is we want to be able to capture some of these changes real time. And all these micro changes or changes that we make would then be redeployed in the real world, right? So the whole idea is that with some of the lessons learned, especially in being able to up worker productivity or work productivity, output productivity, and cost reduction, we hope that can then also inform decisions we make in Korea and also in other parts of the world.
So it really sounds like with this microfactory in Singapore, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of how you go about putting that car together. You have more data from that digital twin, and hopefully that means you can better meet consumer demands. Tell us a little bit more about that customization bit that everyone's so excited about, talking about personalization.
Okay, so there are actually two bits, right? I would say the answer is yes and no. While it's true that you have some flexibility, there are challenges with automation. There are challenges in terms of bringing up the extent of automation and the use of robots in I would say, restricted space in Singapore, because there are going to be processes and process cells where you would still require human labor. So having human workers work alongside robots creates a lot of problems, right? You need to, first of all, have enough space. You may have to redesign the process. Right, so that's really more on the manufacturing side, which is why we're spending a lot of time, looking for solutions. Now, related to your other question around, does that create more choices for customization for the consumer? Well, I would say the answer is yes, right? The short answer is yes, but it will not be immediate. It's a journey, because even if you look at cell phones or laptops, right, with customization, it's a menu that you can choose your customization from. It's never going to be, oh, fine, today I want my car to be yellow, in the afternoon I want it to be purple, right, at night I want it to be, silver. We could get that with software-defined vehicles at some point in time and specialty new materials.
Like you said, we're not there, that full smartphone. Yeah, so it's not unbounded because we are obviously constrained by practical limits.
We're working on it, and I think in the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, and actually moving down south, away from Singapore to the south towards Indonesia, where there's more space. We understand that you have been building up a plant to produce 250,000 units by 2025. And separately, you've also been partnering with LG Energy Solutions to build up a factory cell plant in Karawang. Indonesia. Can you tell us more about the battery cell plant and how big is it going to be in terms of gigawatts of battery being produced, of power?
Right. So the Gigafactory in Cikarang, just east of Jakarta, not too far away, about 40 kilometers away. It's at least at this point in time, the initial plan is 10 gigawatt hour, right, capacity, with the option depending on demand, from Indonesia, and of course also the opportunity to supply to the region, Southeast Asia. We can bring up to 30 gigawatt. All right. There's obviously that possibility. Again, it all depends on demand that we see. Yeah.
And we do know you've been doing very well with your two EV sales or two EV models being sold in Indonesia today.
Yeah.
Are there, I know it's different things, but are there any transferable lessons from your microfactory in Singapore that you can port over to Indonesia for both plants?
Well, we hope so. Yeah. So I think the great thing about being able to do digital twinning, right, is that a lot of the lessons and the experiments that we're currently making, we record them, we're able to review them. We hope that we're going to be able to take some of these lessons, whether in terms of the level of automation, right? I think somebody mentioned autonomous forklifts, right? So it's not just about teleops, teleassistants, that are perhaps sometimes related to regulation, but it's also around what type of robot or AMR perhaps, right, is best suited for the task, especially in a cobot environment. A cobot as in collaborative robots working alongside human beings. How do you do that safely? We've invested in a company called Boston Dynamics. You might have heard of it. It's most famous for a dog-like robot, right? So we are also using that dog-like robot. We call it Spot, to do some lifting of parcels and containers, within the factory alongside our autonomous forklifts, right? We think that Spot would be able to access harder to reach nooks and crannies, right, and harder to reach areas, and so there are applications for that. But I think more importantly, it's also it's also about process improvements. Can we redesign processes, in Indonesia based on lessons that we've learned in Singapore? It's not straightforward simply because the production plant in Indonesia is a hybrid plant. It produces both ICE vehicles and also EVs. Whereas in Singapore, it's pure EVs. Yeah.
Right. Well, like you said, some of them might require incremental progress and changes. Perhaps others might require ripping the foundation and building a new house, as you spoke about earlier. Still staying on Indonesia, and we know that the whole scene is heating up there in terms of EV. There's yourself, LG Energy. There's also Chinese battery giant CATL, which in fact announced just last year that they were entering into that US $6 billion joint investment to create an integrated battery chain complex in North Maluku province. Now, with all of that, and of course, President Jokowi wanting to move Indonesia more towards downstream processing capabilities, how do you think it's going to transform the role that Indonesia plays in the EV supply chain? And will this spur peripheral industries?
I think when people look at Southeast Asia, Indonesia is, I would say, it's sort of like the largest market, right? In terms of GDP, its demographics is amazing. I mean, it's young. So everybody salivates, right? And I think what really works for Indonesia is that they also, they have a lot of raw materials, right, for battery manufacturing, which is why we're there, which is why a lot of the other supply chain players, whether they are battery OEMs or other of our competitors are also looking at Indonesia. You cannot, you probably can't avoid looking at Indonesia as a auto OEM if you are looking at Southeast Asia. So I mean that's a reality, and I think the current Indonesian government is extremely pro-business, and it's it's doing everything in its power to attract FDI into the country, and it's doing very, very well. Yeah, so I would say that, at least, for the foreseeable, whatever, 2-3 years, I do expect Indonesia to give a run, for its money, right? Compared to some of the traditional, I would say, auto hubs like Thailand, right, which is a traditional ICE hub. And again, it's still early days, but I think several Southeast Asian countries are trying to be the auto hub for Southeast Asia, and we'll see. But I think Indonesia is looking very good. Yeah.
Certainly optimistic about Indonesia, and we hope that pro-business policies will continue, even with President Jokowi's successor. Well, how else we spoke a lot about, of course, electric vehicles. How else is Hyundai accelerating or conducting your decarbonization efforts across the entire business?
Yeah, so decarbonization, I mean, we've committed to decarbonization on a global basis, right? We are a pioneer member in some of the in some of these zero carbon councils, and and we've made these pledges. I think the pledge that we've made is that by 2045, right, all of not just Hyundai Motor Company, but its entire supply chain will be, will have zero carbon emission along the entire supply chain. That's 2045. And there are actually quite a number of companies. And within Hyundai Motor Group, there are, other, we've got auto parts suppliers like Hyundai Mobis, Hyundai, perhaps Transys, and Auto Ever. They would probably be able to meet some of these zero carbon targets sooner. Yeah.
Interesting. So by 2045, we can expect the whole of Hyundai as a group to be emissions free.
Yeah. Well, that's the pledge.
Well, that's a target at least.
Right.
Well, we're happy to take questions now from the floor as well as online. Would anybody like to lead the charge with questions? Anything from electric vehicles, microfactories, or anything really that's on your mind? Decarbonization, especially those from the automotive field here. Yes, Arthur would like to ask a question.
If you could be authentic with the answer. How do you see, from the eyes of an automaker like Hyundai, how do you see Toyota going forward? They have not been investing very much in electric, betting more on hydrogen. Going forward, quite a lot of collaborations and rebatching of other brands which have already developed electric vehicles. Would you say that Toyota would still be a leader, which they are the market leader now, or global leader for vehicle in the automotive space? Would you say that in terms of market share, how would you view them going forward?
Well, it's always hard to make some of these predictions, if especially if the timelines are going to be much. It's hard to make some of these predictions if the timelines are much farther away. We respect Toyota a lot, right? It's the largest automaker in the world by volume, right? And to a certain extent, I can understand why they were doubling down on, perhaps hybrid vehicles. They're just doing extremely well, with ICE vehicles, right? So, as what people say, I mean, why would you want to change a winning formula, right? Unfortunately, of course, when the environment changes, what do? Do you not change your mind? So I think Toyota is in an interesting place at the moment where it's sort of grappling with this new trend of EVs coming online, and that seems to be a very good trend of consumer acceptance. Not to mention, I would say very strong government support, right, for EV adoption. At this moment, it appears that they are a little bit slower off the block, but I would say never underestimate your competitors. Yeah, I mean, they were number one for a very, very, very long time, and for good reason. Yeah.
Very gracious answer. Thank you, Arthur, for that very tricky question. Great question. Yes, please, gentleman in blue in the middle.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm a board advisor to Newcastle University that has a campus here. I'm intrigued by EV charging networks, and I kind of struggle to work out how they're going to make money unless you actually own the electrons or got access to the electricity to actually sell. But from Hyundai point of view as an OEM, do you see there being like over-the-top services, or you already have a generous 5-year warranty? Like, so after that 5-year warranty, do you see like subscription services to update software on your cars? And you mentioned the car being like a living room. Do you see like other services being delivered over the top of the EV charging networks, which are quite expensive to build out?
So we have, we have an app, right? And again, we have got, I would say, different versions of this app, depending on market, which market you're in. In Indonesia, the app is called My Hyundai, and I suspect it's going to be, similarly brand in many markets, including in the US. So we are preparing an app for our owners in Singapore, especially, the ones that are buying, the Ioniq 5. And the EVs that are coming out from, from HMGs, but not just EVs from HMGs, but in future, all EVs that we sell in Singapore, right? It's really about bundling some of these services, and I like Arthur's point earlier that if you need a lot of customization, I call it hyper localization. It makes sense to work with local partners because they understand the consumers better. And the turnaround time for troubleshooting, for making changes, are going to be way, way quicker, which is why as part of what we do, we spend quite a bit of time working with local partners, evaluating, and then thinking thoughtfully about how do we bring them onto our platform. What type of services do they provide, and what type of services do we provide? There are some services where we may provide these services at the current moment just to get things started, simply because the ecosystem is so new, right? But longer term wise, it may not be strategic for us to do that. So as an example, you talked about, EV charging networks. In Europe, for instance, we are also an investor in a company called Ionity, which basically does EV charging. It's an EV charging network across Europe. And the way it's done, it's sort of like, it's kind of targeted as a lifestyle concept, right? So you drive your car there, you're treated very well, you're given, very, very good service, and, it fast charges your EV, right? There are going to be different business models, right? So perhaps in Europe, Ionity may work very well. What would be the business model for Asia Pacific and for Southeast Asia in particular? And perhaps what model would work in Singapore? I think all these models would differ. If you look at China, for instance, I was quite surprised to see that they do battery swaps, right, for EV. I mean, if you look at what NIO is doing, they have a robotic platform that when you drive in, that they can, unbolt, the battery from the underside of the car and switch and swap that out so quickly. Is that economically feasible in a place like Singapore and in Southeast Asia? I don't know. Maybe that's possible in China, and basically at what price point, right? So there are these things where we don't know. We can't sit in a room and pontificate, right? And try to, kind of draw circles and imagine things on our own. What we try to do is that we try to discover what the market wants. And sometimes it means partnering with a lot of startups. Sometimes it means investing in startups, right? They are doing different things. Some of them are doing battery swaps. Some of them are doing, EV charging. Some of them are doing, battery sharing, right? So there are all these different, I would say, business models. I don't know which one is going to win, but we gotta take some bets to find out. Yeah.
Right, and spreading those bets, indeed. Different eggs in different baskets. Well, thank you so much for your insights today. That was really thoroughly interesting. And I'm sure many are looking forward to continue the conversation with you over tea break.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
So once again, thank you, David. That was David from Hyundai Cradle Singapore with his very global, hyper-local approach. Thank you, David. Right.